I spent $52,000 on concrete just to watch her life fall apart. And honestly, it was worth every single penny. It was worth the sleepless nights, the calls to the sheriff, the sneering looks over the fence line. That 52 grand, paid in cash from a fund I'd been building since my first prize bull sold, bought me more than a 12-foot steel-reinforced wall. It bought me peace. It bought me justice. And best of all, it bought me a front row seat to the complete and utter implosion of one Brenda Bradshaw. She thought because she drove a white BMW X5 and ran the homeowners association for the New Money subdivision next door, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas the deed is king, and my family's deed to the Riverside Ranch was written in 1940, signed in my great-grandfather's blood, sweat, and calloused hands. That paper had more authority than her checkbook, her lawyer, and her entire sense of self-importance combined. She just didn't know it yet. My life before Brenda was quiet, the way a rancher's life ought to be. It was measured in seasons, not stock prices. The smell of rain on dry dirt, the lowing of cattle at dusk, the weary satisfaction after a day of mending fences under a sun that beat down like a blacksmith's hammer. My wife Sarah, a schoolteacher with a soul as gentle as a spring morning, was the calm center of my world. We had the Riverside Ranch, 50 acres of prime Texas soil that my family had worked for 3 generations. It wasn't just land, it was a living thing, a legacy. The dirt under my boots was the same dirt my grandfather had plowed. The ancient oaks that shaded the house had witnessed my father's birth and would, I prayed, witness my own children's someday. The trouble started subtly, like a slow leak in a tire. A new development, grandly named Sterling Meadows, began to sprout on the adjacent property, a parcel of land that had been sold off by a distant cousin decades ago. At first it was just the noise of construction, a necessary evil we could live with, but then the houses went up, oversized, beige boxes crammed together with no room to breathe, and with the houses came the people who wanted the ranch lifestyle without the work, the mud, or the reality of it. And then came Brenda Bradshaw, president of the Sterling Meadows HOA, a real estate agent with teeth so white they looked like a threat and a voice that could curdle milk from 50 paces. The first time I saw her, she was speeding down my private access road in that sterile white BMW, kicking up a rooster tail of dust that settled over my freshly washed truck. My road, mind you, the one and only way to get to my house, and the main pastures, a half-mile stretch of packed dirt and gravel that my family had maintained for 80 years. The Sterling Meadows development had its own paved entrance a quarter mile down the county road, but my road was a shortcut, a scenic one, she'd later call it. I was fixing a section of fence near the road, and I just stopped, hammer in hand, and watched her. She didn't slow down, didn't even glance my way. I gave a polite, neighborly wave, a tip of the hat, the kind of gesture that means howdy, but also slow the hell down. She ignored it completely. I let it slide. Maybe she was in a hurry. Maybe she didn't know it was a private drive, despite the very clear, professionally made sign at the entrance that read, Riverside Ranch, private property, no trespassing. A few days later, it happened again. This time, I was moving a small herd of my Angus heifers, including a few pregnant ones, from the north pasture to the south. It's a slow process. You can't rush 1,000 pounds of nervous beef, especially not when they're carrying the future of your herd. I was out there with my best dog Buster taking our time when I heard it. The high-pitched whine of an engine being pushed too hard. The BMW appeared over the rise, a white shark in a sea of green pasture. Instead of slowing down, she honked. A long, imperious blast from a horn designed for city traffic, not open country. The cattle spooked. They scattered, eyes wide with panic. One of the pregnant heifers, a gentle girl named Daisy I'd bottle-fed as a calf, stumbled and went down hard. My heart jumped into my throat. Buster was barking his head off, trying to regain control, but the damage was done. Brenda finally stopped, her car right in the middle of my scattered herd, and rolled down her window. "Can you please move your livestock?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. It wasn't a question. It was a command. I walked over, my boots heavy with anger. I kept my voice level the way my father taught me. Never let them see you sweat, and never let them see you rage. "Ma'am," I started, tipping my hat out of habit more than respect. "This is a private road, and these are pregnant animals. You can't come flying through here laying on your horn. You could have caused a serious injury." She gave me a tight plastic smile. "Bless your heart," she said. "And in Texas, that's just about the most insulting thing you can say to a person. I'm Brenda Bradshaw with Sterling Meadows Realty. I'm just trying to get to the development. This road is the most direct route for our residents and for my clients." "This road isn't for your residents or your clients," I said, my voice getting a little harder. "This road belongs to my ranch. Your entrance is down by the highway." She scoffed, a little puff of air through her perfectly sculpted nose. "Don't be ridiculous. This is clearly an access easement. We're a community. We should be working together to enhance property values." She used words like synergy and optimization, corporate buzzwords that meant nothing out here. "There is no easement," I stated, plain and simple. "This is my land. The sign is very clear. Please use your own entrance from now on." Her smile vanished. "We'll see about that," she snapped and rolled up her window. She gunned the engine, forcing a path through the still nervous cattle, and sped off, leaving me in another cloud of dust and indignation. I spent the next hour calming the herd and checking on Daisy, who was thankfully just shaken up and bruised, but a line had been crossed. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a declaration of war. That night, I told Sarah what happened. She listened patiently, her hand resting on mine. She was the worrier in the family, the one who saw all the potential pitfalls. "Jake, be careful," she warned. "People like that, they have lawyers. They have money." "We have a deed, Sarah," I said, looking out the window at the land bathed in moonlight. "We have the truth. That's got to be worth more than her BMW." I wanted to believe it. But deep down, a cold knot of dread was forming in my stomach. Brenda Bradshaw wasn't the type to just go away. She was the type to dig in, to escalate, to make your life a living hell until she got what she wanted, and what she wanted was my road. My first countermove was simple. I went to the hardware store and bought the heaviest duty chain and the meanest looking padlock they had. I drove to the entrance of my road and spent a good hour installing a brand new 6-inch thick cedar post next to the existing gate post. I strung the chain between them and snapped the padlock shut. It felt solid. Final. I updated the private property sign with a new, more aggressive one. "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." It wasn't subtle, but I was past subtle. For 2 glorious days, there was peace. No white BMW, no dust clouds, just the sound of the wind and the cattle. I started to think, maybe that was all it took. A locked gate, a clear boundary. On the 3rd morning, I drove down to get the mail and found my expensive chain lying in the dirt, cut clean through with a pair of bolt cutters. The padlock was gone, and there, in the soft mud from the overnight rain, were the unmistakable tire tracks of her BMW. The rage that filled me was cold and sharp. This was a deliberate criminal act. She hadn't just trespassed, she had destroyed my property to do it. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Miller, a good local boy I'd known since he was in diapers, came out. He looked at the cut chain, at the tire tracks, and sighed. "It's her, Jake. I know it is," he said, kicking at the dirt with his boot. "But you didn't see her do it. There's no proof it was her, and not just some kids." "Who else would it be, Ron?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "She's the only one who thinks she has a right to this road." I know, he said, holding up a hand. "Look, file a report for destruction of property, and I'll go have a chat with her. But without a witness or a picture, my hands are tied. Officially." A picture. The deputy's words sparked an idea. That afternoon, I was back at the hardware store buying the best trail camera they had. It was motion activated, took high-definition video day or night, and was camouflaged to look like a piece of tree bark. I mounted it high up on one of the big oaks overlooking the gate, perfectly concealed. Then I bought another, even heavier chain and 2 new padlocks. I wasn't just locking the gate anymore, I was setting a trap. It didn't take long. Less than 24 hours later, the camera's memory card was full. I took it back to the house, my hands trembling slightly as I slid it into my laptop. And there she was, clear as day in crisp HD, the white BMW pulled up. Brenda Bradshaw got out, dressed in a sharp business suit, looking annoyed. She pulled a massive pair of bolt cutters from her trunk and went to work on the first padlock. Snap. She moved to the second. Snap. She tossed the cut chain and locks into the weeds, got back in her car, and drove through. But she didn't just drive through alone. 5 minutes later, the camera caught her coming back the other way, this time with a minivan full of people behind her, a family. She had parked her car and was giving them a tour, gesturing expansively at my pastures, my trees, my land, as if it were all part of the package. She was using my ranch as a sales tool. I saved the videos. I had her. Cold, hard, time-stamped proof. I drove into town, not to the sheriff's office, but to her shiny new sales office at the entrance of Sterling Meadows. I walked in, holding my hat in my hands, and waited for her to finish with a client. When they left, I stepped up to her desk. "Brenda," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "We need to talk." She looked up, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "I'm very busy, Mr. McCoy. What is it?" "It's about my gate," I said, "and my locks, the ones you keep cutting." Her face hardened. "I have no idea what you're talking about. That road is a public easement, and you are illegally obstructing it. My lawyer is already drafting a letter." "Your lawyer might want to see this first," I said, pulling out my phone. I played the video. Her face went from smug to pale to furious in about 5 seconds. The sound of the bolt cutters snapping the locks filled the quiet office. "This is an invasion of my privacy," she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You're recording me without my consent." "In Texas, it's a one-party consent state, ma'am," I said calmly. "And you're on my property committing a crime. That's a Class B misdemeanor, criminal mischief, not to mention the trespassing. Now, I'm giving you one last chance. You stay off my land. You use your own damn road. If I see your car, or you, on my property again, this video goes straight to the sheriff, and I press charges. Are we clear?" For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Her face was mottled red and white. She was breathing heavily, her manicured hands clenched into fists on her desk. "You will regret this," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will bury you in legal fees. I will own that road, and I will own your pathetic little farm." I just tipped my hat. "Not in this county, darling," I said, and walked out. The war escalated. Brenda was done with bolt cutters. She was moving on to bureaucratic warfare. The following week, a very official-looking truck from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the TCEQ, rolled down my drive. A stern-faced inspector got out, clipboard in hand, announcing he was there to investigate an anonymous complaint about illegal dumping of hazardous materials and contaminated agricultural runoff into Willow Creek. I was stunned. It was a complete fabrication. My family had been stewards of this land for generations. We practiced rotational grazing to prevent erosion. We maintained buffer zones around the creek, and the only hazardous material we had was diesel for the tractor stored safely in an approved tank 100 yards from any water source. I spent the next 4 hours walking the inspector over every inch of my property. He took water samples, soil samples, inspected my barn, my fuel storage, my manure composting pile. I was polite, cooperative, and transparent. I showed him my records, my herd management plan. By the end of the day, the inspector, whose name was David, was shaking his head in disgust. "Mr. McCoy," he said, snapping his clipboard shut, "I'm sorry to have wasted your time. This is one of the cleanest, most well-managed small ranches I've seen in years. The complaint alleged you were running a toxic industrial feedlot. It's absurd. This is a classic case of what we call neighbor harassment. It happens more than you'd think." He couldn't tell me who filed the complaint, of course, but we both knew. He promised to file a report clearing me completely and flagging the source of the complaint as malicious. It was a small victory, but it had cost me a full day's work and a gallon of sweat. 2 weeks later, it was the county health department. Another anonymous tip, this time about unsanitary conditions and improper disposal of animal carcasses, claiming I was creating a public health hazard. Again, a baseless lie. Any animal that dies on the ranch is buried deep, far from any water table as per state regulations. The health inspector was even quicker than the EPA guy. He took one look at my clean, well-maintained barns and pastures and practically apologized for showing up. Brenda was throwing everything she had at the wall, hoping something would stick. But every time one of her official complaints was dismissed, it just created a longer paper trail of her harassment. I was documenting everything. I had a folder an inch thick with the police report, the TCEQ clearance letter, the health department's all clear, and a growing collection of videos from my trail cam, showing her driving slowly past the gate, glaring at it, or parking down the road just to watch my house. The final straw in her paper assault was the lawsuit. A process server showed up one afternoon while I was branding calves and handed me a thick envelope. It was a civil suit filed by the Sterling Meadows HOA with Brenda Bradshaw as the lead plaintiff. It demanded the court recognize a prescriptive easement over my road, claiming it had been used for public access for years and that my gate was an illegal obstruction. It was filled with legal jargon and outright lies, claiming my aggressive and hostile behavior was preventing hardworking families from accessing their homes. It demanded I remove the gate permanently and pay the HOA's legal fees. My blood ran cold. Sarah was right. She was actually doing it. She was trying to use the courts to steal my land. Sarah found me in the kitchen that evening, staring at the lawsuit, my dinner untouched. She put her arms around me from behind. "We'll fight it, Jake," she said, her voice firm. "Don't let her bully you." "She's not just a bully, Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse. "She's a thief. She wants to take something that isn't hers." The next morning, I wasn't at the lawyer's office. Not yet. I was at the county clerk's office, in the musty basement of the courthouse where they keep the old records. I spent the entire day and the next poring over dusty plat maps, property deeds, and survey records going back to the founding of the county. I traced the lineage of my land and the land that was now Sterling Meadows, and I found it. The original 1940 survey of my great-grandfather's property, clear as a bell, showing the access road located entirely within the boundaries of the Riverside Ranch. I found the deed from when the adjacent parcel was sold in the 1970s, which explicitly stated that no access easement was granted. And then I found the recent subdivision plat for Sterling Meadows, filed just 2 years ago by Brenda's development company. It showed, in black and white, their own dedicated paved access road connecting to the county highway. My road wasn't even on their map. Legally, according to their own filed documents, it didn't exist for them. The lawsuit was a complete and utter fraud, built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated lies. But then, as I was packing up my copies, our mailman, Eddie, saw me through the window and waved me over. Eddie was a town institution. He'd been delivering mail for 30 years and knew everything about everyone. He delivered to my ranch and to the new subdivision. He leaned against his mail truck, wiping sweat from his brow. "Heard you got served by that Bradshaw woman," he said, his voice low. "Figured you might. She's getting real desperate." "What do you mean, desperate?" I asked. Eddie looked both ways, as if sharing a state secret. "She's in deep, Jake. Heard from a buddy over at the bank. Her divorce cleaned her out. She took out some heavy loans to get that development off the ground, and the payments are coming due. She's upside down big time. The houses ain't selling as fast as she promised the bank they would." Then he delivered the payload, the piece of information that changed everything. "Here's the kicker," he whispered, leaning closer. "The reason they ain't selling? She's been promising folks exclusive scenic ranch access as a major selling point. She's been showing potential buyers your road, telling them it's a private drive just for Sterling Meadows residents. My cousin was looking at a house there, and she showed him a marketing brochure with a picture of your longhorns grazing by the creek. Said it was part of the community view corridor. She's even putting the access rights into the sales contracts. I felt the world shift under my feet. It all clicked into place. The desperation, the lawsuit, the harassment. It wasn't just about convenience. It was about fraud. She had sold a lie, a big one, and now she was trying to use the courts and government agencies to bully me into making her lie come true. If she couldn't deliver the access she'd promised in those contracts, the sales would be void. The buyers could walk, demand their deposits back, and she would be ruined, bankrupt. That's when I knew I had her. She hadn't just trespassed on my land. She had bet her entire financial future on it, and she was about to lose that bet. I looked at the mountain of evidence I had collected, the deeds, the surveys, the videos, the reports from the TCEQ and health department, and now this critical piece of information from Eddie. The plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't enough to just win the lawsuit. It wasn't enough to just get her to leave me alone. I had to end it permanently. I had to build something she couldn't cut, couldn't sue, and couldn't ignore. I had to build a wall. It was a crazy idea, born of anger and exhaustion. A wall, a big, ugly, undeniable concrete statement that said, this far and no further. I knew it would be expensive. I knew it would be a fight. But looking at the fraudulent lawsuit in my hand, I realized I was willing to spend $50,000 just to wipe that smug, entitled smile off her face forever. In fact, I was looking forward to it. You know, there comes a point when you're pushed, where the polite warnings and the reasonable requests just echo back at you from a wall of pure entitlement. That's the point where you stop talking and you start building. For me, that moment came standing in the county clerk's office holding a truth so clear and a lie so blatant, I knew a simple gate would never be enough. It was time to escalate, to meet her fraudulent paper war with a very real, very permanent physical solution. The first call I made was to my lawyer, a sharp old boy named Tom who'd handled my family's affairs for 40 years. I laid out everything on his desk, the deeds, the surveys, the videos, the false reports, and Eddie's information about her fraudulent sales contracts. Tom listened, his face impassive, occasionally peering over his spectacles at a document. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. "Jake," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "this isn't a lawsuit. This is a gift. She's handed you a loaded gun and pointed it at her own head. All you have to do is help her pull the trigger." He told me to countersue for harassment, legal fees, and property damage, but to hold off on filing it. Let her dig her own grave a little deeper, he advised. Let her spend her money. We'll respond to her suit, but we'll drag it out. In the meantime, what's this about a wall? I told him my plan, a 12-foot steel-reinforced concrete agricultural security barrier, running the full width of my property line where it met the road. Not a fence, a wall. Tom's eyes lit up. He spent 20 minutes on the phone with the county planning and zoning department. He hung up, grinning. "It's beautiful," he said, "as long as it's for agricultural security, preventing livestock theft, securing equipment, that sort of thing, and it's on your property. You don't need a residential building permit. It falls under agricultural construction. It's practically untouchable. She can't do a damn thing about it." My next call was to Big Mike. Big Mike was a contractor who looked like he was carved out of the same rock he often blasted. He was a man of few words, most of which were punctuated by a stream of tobacco juice. He hated two things in this world: shoddy workmanship and entitled city folk. Brenda Bradshaw was the living embodiment of the second. I met him out at the property line. I showed him where I wanted the wall. I want it big, Mike. I want it strong. I want it to be the last thing she sees every time she leaves her precious subdivision. Mike kicked the dirt, spat, and squinted at the imaginary line. 12-foot high, you say? 18-inch thick. Double rebar cage. 3-foot concrete footings. Even a tank ain't getting through this, he grunted. Gonna cost you, though. I've got the money, I said. Pulled it from the cattle fund. Consider it an investment in herd security? He grinned a tobacco-stained grin. I like it. When do we start? This was where the timing became critical. I needed to inflict maximum psychological and financial damage. I had Eddie keep his ear to the ground. A week later, he called me. It's on, Jake. She's planning a huge Founders Weekend open house. 3 weeks from Saturday, she's got catering, a bouncy castle for the kids, the works. She told the bank she's expecting to close on 10 houses that weekend. She needs the commission checks to make a big loan payment. It was perfect. I called Big Mike. We start the Friday of Founders Weekend. I want you to make as much noise as legally possible. The day before the construction began, I did one final thing. I had a massive custom sign made. It was 4 feet by 8 feet, professionally lettered. I installed it right next to my now useless gate, facing out toward the main road. It read, "Construction notice. Permanent agricultural security barrier being erected on this private property. There is no public access, easement, or thoroughfare. Access to Sterling Meadows is via the main highway entrance only." That Friday morning, the sun wasn't even fully up when the first truck arrived. It was a massive excavator, its treads clanking on the gravel, and it sounded like the devil himself was coming to breakfast. Big Mike was at the controls, and he started by digging a trench 3 feet deep and 3 feet wide across the entire 50-foot entrance. By 7 a.m., a convoy of cement mixers and dump trucks carrying rebar was rumbling down the county road, lining up to get to work. The noise was biblical, and it worked like a charm. At 7:15, Brenda's front door flew open. She came storming out in a silk bathrobe and slippers, her hair in a messy bun, her face a mask of pure fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, marching toward Big Mike, who had just hopped down from the excavator. Big Mike took a slow swig from his coffee thermos, then spat a brown stream of juice that landed inches from her fuzzy slipper. "Mornin', ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Pardon the noise. Just doing a little agricultural improvement project." "You are blocking my access. I have clients coming. This is my big open house weekend. You can't do this," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Ma'am, I ain't on your property," Mike said, gesturing with his thumb back toward the trench, "and I got a permit right here." He pulled the county-stamped agricultural permit from his truck and held it up for her to see. "It says here, your property line ends right about where your pretty little shoes are. This here is the McCoy Ranch, and Mr. McCoy wants a wall." She sputtered, speechless for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. I'll have you shut down." "You do that," Mike said, and climbed back into his excavator. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Deputy Miller's cruiser pulled up. Brenda ran over to him, pointing and waving her arms, a torrent of accusations pouring out of her. Miller listened patiently, then walked over to me. I was standing by my truck just watching the show. "Morning, Jake," he said, a tired look on his face. "Morning, Ron," I said, handing him my copy of the permit and the survey map. He looked them over, then walked back to Brenda. His voice was loud enough for me to hear. "Ma'am, his paperwork is all in order. He's on his own property. There's nothing I can do. It's a civil matter." "A civil matter? He's ruining my business," she yelled. "You can take that up with your lawyer," Miller said, getting back in his car. "Have a nice day." And he drove off, leaving her standing there in the dust of the construction site, looking utterly defeated. The rest of the weekend was a symphony of destruction for her and sweet, sweet music to my ears. The rebar cages were set on Saturday. All day, prospective buyers for Sterling Meadows would drive up, see the massive, prison-like construction, read my sign, and turn around looking confused. I saw Brenda running out to talk to them, her fake smile plastered on, her gestures becoming more and more frantic as they shook their heads and drove away. Eddie told me later that her open house was a complete bust. Only 2 families showed up, and both of them left after asking hard questions about the scenic ranch access that was now a war zone. Sunday was the main event. The concrete pour, 5 cement mixers, one after another, churning and groaning as they filled the forms with thousands of pounds of wet concrete. It was a slow, methodical process, the wall rising from the earth like some ancient monolith. By sunset on Sunday, it was done. A 12-foot high, 50-foot wide, 18-inch thick slab of brutalist, unapologetic, steel-reinforced concrete. In the middle, Big Mike had set a new gate, a custom-built, solid steel behemoth that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. The silence that fell after the trucks left was profound. The wall stood there gray and imposing in the fading light. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever built. Brenda was gone. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I figured she had finally given up, retreated to lick her wounds. I was wrong. She hadn't retreated. She was reloading. Around 9 o'clock that night, I was sitting in my living room with Sarah when I heard the squeal of tires on the pavement out on the county road. Then a roar, the unmistakable sound of a high-performance engine being pushed to its absolute limit. I stood up and went to the window just in time to see it. It was the white BMW X5, rocketing down the road, its headlights like angry eyes. It wasn't heading for the subdivision entrance. It was heading straight for my wall, straight for the new steel gate. She must have snapped. In her rage and desperation, she must have thought she could ram it down, that a $50,000 German SUV could defeat $52,000 of Texas concrete and steel. She was wrong. The impact was not the crash I expected. It was a dull, sickening thud, a sound of finality. It was the sound of expensive engineering meeting immovable object. The front end of the BMW crumpled like a tin can. The hood buckled. The engine was driven back into the firewall, and the windshield exploded into a spiderweb of fractured glass. The airbags deployed with a violent poof. And then silence. The gate? It didn't have a scratch on it. The paint wasn't even chipped. It hadn't so much as rattled in its frame. I was already on the phone with 911. "There's been an accident," I said, my voice steady. "A woman just drove her car into my concrete security barrier. Yes, she appears to be conscious. Send an ambulance, and you'd better send the sheriff too." I walked out there, flashlight in hand. The BMW was a wreck, steam hissing from its mangled grille. Brenda was slumped against the deployed airbag, dazed and bleeding from a cut on her forehead. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying cocktail of hatred and defeat. You did this," she whimpered. I just shone my flashlight on the pristine, undamaged gate, then back to the wreckage of her car. "No, ma'am," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You did this to yourself." The flashing lights arrived, painting the scene in strobes of red and blue. The paramedics checked her out while Deputy Miller took my statement. He looked from the car to the wall and just shook his head, a small, wry smile on his face. "Agricultural security barrier, huh?" he said. "Looks like it works." They had to use a tow truck to peel the remains of her BMW off my gate. As they hauled it away, a pathetic, twisted hunk of metal, I knew this was the end of the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. The final act was yet to come. And it wasn't going to be on my property. It was going to be in public, where everyone could see her for what she truly was. The aftermath of Brenda's kamikaze attack on my wall was a turning point. She was cited for reckless driving, and her insurance company, upon seeing the police report and the pictures of my entirely undamaged gate, promptly dropped her. She was left with a totaled luxury SUV and a mountain of debt that was about to get a whole lot bigger. The wall stood as a silent gray testament to her failure. But I knew that wasn't enough. She had committed fraud. She had lied to people, cheated them, and tried to ruin my life to cover her tracks. She needed to face real consequences, not just a wrecked car and a traffic ticket. The final victory had to be public, and it had to be total. The perfect venue presented itself just a few weeks later, the annual Williamson County Fair. It was the biggest social event of the year. Everyone was there, farmers, ranchers, politicians, local business owners, and most importantly, the local news media. It was the town square in its purest form, a place where reputations were made and, if you played your cards right, destroyed. My lawyer, Tom, had filed my countersuit. It was a masterpiece of legal retribution, detailing every instance of harassment, trespassing, property destruction, and defamation. But the real bombshell was the evidence of her real estate fraud. We had affidavits from 2 of the families who had backed out of their contracts after her open house fiasco. They had provided copies of their sales agreements, which explicitly promised deeded access via the Riverside Ranch Scenic Drive. It was the smoking gun. The plan was simple. We knew Brenda would be at the fair. Her real estate company always had a booth there, a sad little table with wilting balloons where she'd try to hawk her overpriced beige boxes. She would be trying to do damage control, to project an image of success and normalcy. We also knew that the local news crew that had run her initial smear piece against me would be there looking for folksy color stories. I was going to give them the story of the year. I also made a few phone calls. I reached out to the 3 other families who had contracts with her, the ones still on the hook. I didn't threaten or cajole. I simply said, "My name is Jake McCoy. I own the property adjacent to Sterling Meadows. I believe you have been given some fraudulent information regarding your property purchase. If you would like clarification on the matter of your legal access, I suggest you be at the county fair on Saturday at 2 p.m. The Channel 8 news team will be there as well." Finally, I paid a visit to the county sheriff himself. I laid out my entire folder on his desk. The videos, the deeds, the surveys, the fraudulent contracts. I didn't ask him to do anything. I just said, "Sheriff, I believe multiple felonies have been committed. I'll be presenting this information publicly at the fair on Saturday. I just wanted you to be aware in case there's a public disturbance." He looks out through the file, his expression growing grimmer with each page. He looked up at me and said, "Thank you for the heads up, Mr. McCoy. We'll be there." Saturday arrived, hot and dusty. The fair was in full swing. The air smelled of popcorn, livestock, and diesel fumes. Sarah was with me, her hand holding mine tightly. "Are you sure about this, Jake?" she asked, her voice quiet. "She started this, Sarah," I said, squeezing her hand. "I'm just finishing it." We found Brenda's booth near the petting zoo. It was just as I'd imagined. A folding table, a few sad-looking brochures, and Brenda herself, wearing a bright yellow dress and a smile that was stretched so tight it looked painful. She was talking to an elderly couple, gesturing animatedly. Her eyes widened when she saw me approaching, and a flicker of panic crossed her face before she masked it with her usual condescending glare. Right on cue, the Channel 8 news reporter, a young woman named Jessica, spotted me. She had her cameraman in tow. "Mr. McCoy," she called out, hurrying over. "Jessica Hale, Channel 8 News. We ran a story a few weeks ago. We'd love to get your side of the dispute with the Sterling Meadows development." This was it. Showtime. "I'd be happy to clear things up, Jessica," I said, my voice calm and loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. I saw the families I had called standing nearby, watching intently. "The fact is there is no dispute. There is a case of criminal fraud being perpetrated by that woman right over there." I pointed directly at Brenda. A gasp went through the crowd. Brenda's face went white. "That is slander. It's defamation," she shrieked, marching toward us. "It's only slander if it isn't true, Brenda," I said, holding up a thick stack of papers. The news camera zoomed in. "This," I announced, "is a copy of the official county survey plat for my property, the Riverside Ranch, dated 1940. And this is the plat for your Sterling Meadows subdivision. As you can see, there is no easement. My road is entirely on my land." I began handing out copies to the reporter, to the families she'd been swindling, to anyone in the crowd who would take one. "And this," I continued, my voice rising, "is a copy of a sales contract from Sterling Meadows promising the buyer deeded access over my private property, a right she has no legal ability to grant. That's called fraud." The crowd was murmuring now, the tide of public opinion turning against her in a visible wave. The families who had bought houses from her were staring at their contracts, then at her, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning fury. "He's lying!" Brenda screamed, her composure completely shattering. "He's a crazy old redneck who is trying to ruin my business. He's blocking access for hardworking families." "Ma'am, is this your signature on this contract?" one of the husbands asked, shoving the paper in her face. "Did you sell us land you knew we couldn't get to the way you promised?" Brenda was cornered, her eyes darting around for an escape. The camera was right in her face, recording every second of her meltdown. And then, through the crowd, came the calm, steady presence of two uniformed sheriff's deputies. They walked right up to her. The lead deputy, a big man with a calm demeanor, didn't raise his voice. "Brenda Bradshaw," he said, his voice carrying with authority, "you're under arrest for multiple counts of felony real estate fraud and criminal trespassing." The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The sound was as crisp and final as a gavel strike. The cameras flashed. A dozen cell phones were up, recording her humiliation. She didn't go quietly. She shrieked. She cried. She accused me of setting her up. She threatened everyone with her lawyer, but it was useless. The deputies led her away, a sobbing, defeated mess in a ridiculous yellow dress, right past the petting zoo. I just stood there leaning against a fence post, Sarah's hand in mine. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched. And as they put her in the back of the cruiser, I tipped my hat. The downfall was swift and total. The news story ran that night, leading the broadcast. With her arrest public, every person she had ever signed a contract with lawyered up. The civil suits piled on top of the criminal charges. The bank called in its loans. She was forced to declare bankruptcy. Sterling Meadows went into receivership, and the bank that took it over had to spend a fortune to build a new, much longer, and much less scenic access road on their own property. Brenda lost her real estate license, her reputation, and her freedom. She took a plea deal and ended up serving 18 months in state prison. Life on the Riverside Ranch returned to its quiet rhythm. The wall is still there, a gray monument at the end of my drive. Sometimes, the new residents of Sterling Meadows, the ones who bought their houses from the bank, stop and look at it. They know the story. Some of them even wave. They use their own road now. The other evening, Sarah and I were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The only sounds were the crickets and the lowing of the cattle. The peace was absolute. That wall, Sarah said softly, it was a lot of money, Jake. I know, I said, putting my arm around her, but it wasn't just about the money. It was about respect. Respect for the land, for the law, for the lines that people aren't supposed to cross. I looked at that big, ugly, beautiful wall, standing guard over our peace and quiet. It was the best 52 grand I ever spent. They say good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. And if you ask me, that's a home improvement project that's worth every single penny. It ensures that the only screeching I have to hear now is from a red-tailed hawk, and the only unwelcome guest is the occasional coyote. And that's a kind of quiet you just can't put a price on. And that is how a $52,000 wall saved my ranch and sent a fraudster to jail. If you love seeing entitled nightmares get a dose of concrete justice, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories from the ranch. Have you ever had a neighbor from hell? Tell me in the comments.